Um, and welcome back to Distributed. My name is Anna Savina, and I'm a content marketing manager here at Miro. Before we start, I just wanted to go through several housekeeping items. I want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and we're going to share our recordings next week with all the registrants. And also, I'm really excited because this session is also, we have a visual note taker with us, so we will be sharing some screens with live notes, and I know that some people really liked it, so I'm super excited about that. And today I have an honor to interview Irene Au, who is a design partner at Khosla Ventures and is a UX design and research expert. So today we're going to talk about how to become a better designer and a better person and find the balance in your life and in your career. So Irene, before we start, I just wanted to briefly ask you about your role at Khosla, because I think design partner is not a really common role, and I'm curious what it really means.
Sure. So I work at a venture capital firm called Khosla Ventures as an operating partner. Operating partners are people with deep functional operating experience. We are people who have been inside companies on the ground, building companies, and have deep expertise in a particular domain or area. So in my case, it's user experience and design. At Khosla Ventures, we also have operating partners that specialize in um, artificial intelligence, marketing, communications, et cetera. And generally, we get involved with the startups once we, as a firm, have decided to make an investment in the startup. So we are here to help the entrepreneurs be successful, whatever that means. And so, given that people are increasingly recognizing that design is as critical to company success as technology and sales and marketing, et cetera, but it's still a relatively new profession. A lot of entrepreneurs have a lot of questions about how to enable design within their organizations, how to set that up, and how to really use design to the best towards the best outcome.
Right. I know that you are advising a lot of leaders on hiring designers today and like building design teams. So I'm curious about the skills that are important right now for those who are in a design role, or even for those who are just beginning their career in design, how they can stand out.
Mm-hmm. Design is a very multidisciplinary field, and to have a robust design organization within a company, it does really require having all of those kinds of skills encompassed into the organization. So you need people who um, understand aesthetics and can interpret the company's brand into an aesthetic experience. You need people who understand how to move users through an experience that's easy to understand, easy to learn, easy to use. You need people who can kind of help prototype and execute and implement and follow through. And so it's very rare that all of those skills are embodied in one particular person. So it's important to think about these are the skills that you need, and how are you going to bring those into the order. It's through you know a single person who kind of does a little bit of everything, but maybe not excellent at any one particular thing, or so like a generalist, which is really great for early stage startups, or like as a company grows, maybe bringing in specialized designers, user researchers, web developers, things like that. In terms of skills, I really think of it as two big buckets. One is hard skills and the other is soft skills. So within any given discipline, you will have a bunch of hard skills that you need to expect. So for our user researchers, they need to understand how to develop a research program. What are the different methods and tools that are appropriate to use for any given kind of research program? Study design, how to synthesize and analyze and interpret results, and then also how to communicate that back out to an organization. And for designers, for visual design, it may be around like principles of good visual design, typography, color theory, things like that, proportion, scale. And then for interaction design, it will be around things like usability, navigation, information architecture, interaction design, and so on and so forth. So for hard skills, it's like you need to know the tools of the trade, know how to do your job, develop your own sensibilities and tastes. You have to understand what works and doesn't work. And that is really gained through experience over time, but also a lot of trial and error and observation, getting feedback and listening. There's a lot of debate in the design industry about whether designers should know how to code. And my personal feeling is that while most designers are not spending their days coding up their designs, those with technical skills really get an extra boost. When I think about the top 5 designers I've worked with in my career, they have all been very technical and were able to bring their ideas to life. They understood how software is made, and they could negotiate successfully with engineers. They could demonstrate and better communicate their ideas because these were interactive prototypes. And similar to like for other fields, other creative fields, like if you're an architect, you may be a more effective architect if you understand structural engineering, or like a fashion designer who understands how to sew. They're just going to be a little bit better at conceiving ideas that can be executed. Also in the bucket of hard skills would be things like understanding how to use data to inform decisions, and also recognizing data's limitations and pitfalls, the ability to bring in qualitative to complement quantitative data, and using things like stories and user research to inspire people and drive decision making. And then also in the category of hard skills, and this bleeds into soft skills, is holistic thinking. And I think this is something that designers really bring to the team in a very unique and meaningful way, recognizing that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if you push something in one direction here, it's going to have these ripple effects in other areas. And understanding how all of that works is really important. As much as hard skills are important, I think that really the presence or absence of soft skills are really what makes or breaks a person's career. And this kind of encompasses the ability to communicate and to listen, you know, being reflective, like understanding who you are, and having some self-awareness, like understanding your own emotions and how that affects your own performance, and what are you feeling and why, and how that helps or hurts what you're trying to do. The ability to self-manage, so having initiative, being able to deal with ambiguity, being able to control impulsive feelings or behaviors, and managing your emotions, being able to follow through on commitments. Those are all really important. And then social awareness is another example where to what extent do you have empathy? And can you understand how other people feel? And can you pick up on emotional cues and kind of recognize the power dynamics within a particular group or an organization? And can you navigate that successfully? And then a companion to social awareness is the ability to build meaningful relationships with other people. Design teams can often be accused of being kind of insular because they have their own culture, and they work with each other. And I've seen some design organizations not be as extroverted, building strong relationships with product managers and engineers, for example, or even executives in sales and customer service and things like that. Those people who can develop and maintain good relationships across organizational boundaries and within a particular organization, and can communicate clearly and inspire and influence others and work well in a team, be able to manage conflict, that kind of thing. Those kinds of skills will really catapult designers to the next level. So those are really, really important. In terms of how people early in their careers can stand out, I think it's just really helpful to be very curious and interested in something, and to keep making, like to keep trying things. I know that you guys had Jake Knapp here before, and he was my colleague at Google. And design sprints, this was just something that we had started to develop at Google many years ago as a way to help bring empathy to the entire product development team. And then in a repeatable way, how could we expose people to user research, help them build empathy, and then brainstorm ideas, and then edit them, and then prototype them, and then test them. And Jake was just really fascinated by process, and constantly looked at how could this be improved. And so he didn't arrive at his final product right away, but he kept trying things and reflecting on what's working, what's not working, how could this be better, just as a designer would. And so I think being really curious and interested in something and just keep making is a really important practice to stand out and just be better. I have another former colleague from my Yahoo days, Suzanne Ginsberg, who was exceptional at collaborating well with stakeholders. She was the designer that every engineer wanted to work with and loved collaborating with. And she was really great at listening to her stakeholders and negotiating with them and managing conflict and making sure that they felt heard and incorporating her own ideas in there along the way. And now she's like a design leader at Uber. And then, as I mentioned before, technical skills, like the ability to prototype and make ideas come to life. And I'm reminded of my former colleagues at Google, like Nicholas Jitkoff and John Wiley. Nicholas Jitkoff went on to be VP of Design at Dropbox, and John Wiley's still at Google. But they were really exceptional at just like building stuff and showing them around and iterating on that. But I mean, Nicholas Jitkoff was originally a software engineer. And so, he had these really wonderful skills that allowed him to be extremely effective and creative. So, yeah.
Right, right. I think you named so many good points here, but it's really interesting for me, especially this year when so many teams are hiring people remotely or they can't really have an on-site interview. How do you, in a kind of remote environment, how do you show your skills that you are able to work remotely? How do you evaluate the skills if you're a leader? Because I think in an office environment it's a little bit easier to show that you have certain soft skills that are important for designers, like the way you communicate, for example, with the product team, with the development team. But how do you do it remotely?
It all comes down to the work, the impact, and the results. And whether you're working remotely or in person, I think there are very tangible ways you can show um, your your effectiveness. If you're looking for a job, the first thing hiring managers will look at is the portfolio, because that is going to represent what you can do, and it needs to tell a good story. So you don't want to have a portfolio that just shows that you understand the mechanics of design process and that you can execute it. And you also don't want to have a portfolio that is just comprised of static images. You need to be able to tell a good story around the context. What was the problem that you were trying to solve? What were the constraints and the requirements? What were all the different stakeholder interests? And how did you develop an understanding of what your end users needed and how they behave, what motivates them, that sort of thing? That informed kind of some of the ideation. What were some of the ideas that you came up with? Like, as a hiring manager, I'm really curious and interested in seeing how creative is a person. And one of the best markers for that is to see how many different ideas can they generate when they're trying to solve a problem. And just as important as divergent thinking is to designers and the design process, you also need the ability. So how do they go from generating a lot of ideas, if they are able to show that, to narrowing down to a few candidates that then can be tested out and evaluated and then improved upon. And so, like, all of these skills are things that you should be able to talk about and demonstrate in your portfolio, and then also in an in-person interview. And good interviewers will ask questions about constraints and requirements and conflict, negotiating through challenges and things like that. And those are all things that you can speak to either in the portfolio or in person. Um, and those kinds of indications are really telling. And then another question I like to ask is, if you had more time, how would you improve on this? Because if a designer has immediate answers to this, it says to me that they've thought really deeply about this problem. And designers will say design is never done, right? There's always something that can be improved upon. And so I'm looking to see, is the designer self-aware and reflective in that way? So those are just a few examples. Yeah.
storytelling part is really interesting because it's like your first point of contact with the hiring manager. I think I see so many good questions in Slido, and I encourage everyone to submit their questions in Slido if you have them for Irene. But before we jump into this section, I think my last question is probably around like emotional balance and emotional well-being, because I know, Irene, you are really passionate about yoga and mindfulness and how it can help designers. So I'm wondering, especially this year with so much stress, what's your kind of top advice for people who are experiencing these challenges, and how this kind of personal practices can be intertwined with design practices?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I think are really helpful. One is to recognize that change is constant. This is an exceptional year, unlike any others, but even in a so-called normal year, there is always change happening. So try to embrace the impermanence of it all. Like what you ate for breakfast this morning is as much in the past as the dinosaurs. So all you really have is now. And so with now, try to see what's in front of you and think about how you can deal with the immediate challenge, like what's in front of you. So it's helpful to approach with a beginner's mind. Don't think about what has been done before or what worked or didn't work before. Don't think about like, well, if these circumstances hadn't changed, I wouldn't have done it this way. This is now, it's a different context and different circumstances. So it helps to kind of come in with a fresh mind. Everything has a duality to it. So there's a good side and a bad side to any kind of approach or context or situation. So see if you can find the potential good or upside in a situation and try to amplify that. I do want to say, I think it's really important for people to take care of themselves first and to prioritize self-care. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane and they tell you to put your oxygen mask on before you put it on your child. You have to be healthy and whole in order to be able to serve and work with others. So, and I have written and spoke quite a bit about this, that what we make is a reflection of who we are and our internal state. So if we're wound up and stressed out and feeling small or whatever, like that is going to manifest in our designs, in our work. There's mind, body, and spirit, and there are techniques to take care of all of those things. Take a walk, stretch, find some kind of physical activity that makes you happy. In terms of the mind, there's meditation, but I also think there are things like, walking away from a problem and relaxing the mind can help you be more creative. You can start to see things in a different way once you've walked away from it as much. Try to stay centered by knowing yourself and what's important to you, and try to rely on the joyful mind. See if you could be known for the joy in your heart in spite of whatever's happening around you. Also taking care of the spirit, I always turn to gratitude. And I count my blessings every day. So even in the midst of this tremendous loss and illness during this pandemic and political turmoil, there's still much to be grateful for. So count your blessings. Don't brood over the faults of other people or yourself. And then find ways to offer your gifts to the world, or at least to the immediate world around you. And know that at the end of the day, you're doing all this not because you're expecting some credit or standing ovation or whatever. You're doing it because it's deep inside your heart, and that's what you want to offer.
Right. I think, here at Miro, we're also really big proponents of, mental health, and we have some yoga sessions together, and it really helps. But I think, I really want to jump, we have so many good questions about processes and about how it's all connected. So I think I want to start with a question that Crystal from Chicago is asking. And her question is, when you are helping a startup build their design practice, what sort of gaps or missing processes do you most often see? So I think this is a really good one. Can we start with this, please?
Yeah, I would say that one of the most underinvested areas that I see in many companies is an underinvestment in user research. I've heard all kinds of excuses for why they can't do user research, like we don't have time. Well, we already have our salespeople talking to our customers, or we already have, we are expected to know all the answers because we don't want to appear weak and vulnerable to our clients. Like that was an interesting response that I heard one time. And also things like, well, if Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Like invention doesn't come from asking people what they want. And I think it's important for people to understand that user research is not about asking people, what should we build? User research, if done right and well, is really about observation. It's sort of like an anthropological study. It's just understanding people's natural behavioral patterns and motivations and how they think and perceive the world, and how that affects how they behave and interact with your product. And that insight can lead to incredible innovation and inspiration for what to do in your products. It is like rocket fuel for helping a team get to the right answer faster. I've also heard objections about user research taking too much time or too many resources. And to that, I would say, again, like the difference between user research in a corporate environment versus like an academic setting is that you do want to have your designs to be the design of your research to be done well, and that it's not biased, and that you're not leading users on when you're asking them questions and things like that. But it is inherently a messy process. It's not large quantitative data that you're collecting, but that qualitative data is still extremely important. The qualitative tells you the why behind the what. So like if your usage logs tell you people are dropping off at this point, you don't really understand why that's happening. But the qualitative user research can help you understand at a deeper level what's actually going on so that you can more effectively address the problem. So if there's one area that I think is the most underinvested among startups, it's user research. And the nice thing, though, is that I do think that those skills can be taught if the team is willing and eager to learn. I think user research is definitely best implemented and executed when you have people who have learned how to do this and have operated successfully as user researchers inside companies. But there are guerrilla user research techniques that even small startups can employ that can help them get insights that they wouldn't otherwise normally get.
Right, right. Another really good question here is about being a generalist. I think this is a really good career question. It's someone is asking if how to make sure that you are still growing when you're a designer who is more of a generalist. And would it be better to some point at some point to have a specialization? What do you think about that?
Well, like I said before, it's very challenging to be excellent at all of the different skills that are needed for successful user experience execution and delivery. And what it means to advance in one's career really means that you're growing, you're building skills, and you're becoming better at your craft. And so I just think there's there's limited time, but there's also these different skills require different skill sets that are often not embodied in a single human being. If you happen to be exceptionally versatile, and there are people like that I've worked with who can code and also create things that are beautiful and can come up with very imaginative interactive designs. That's great. More power to you. I think it's important to know thyself and understand where are you strong, where could you further develop your skills, and also what do you really want to do. Like there are some things that people, in order to really develop those skills, they would have to spend enormous amount of time doing things that maybe they're not naturally good at, or it doesn't make their heart sing. And it's sort of like I'm trying to think of an analogy here, but like if you are good at something and not as good at something else, do you gravitate towards the thing you're good at and develop that and amplify that more, or do you try to focus on improving the thing that you need you're not as weak at and it doesn't make you happy, but you feel like you need to, and that's a personal choice. I generally have observed that people who gravitate towards the things they're really good at and it also makes their heart sing, they tend to grow a lot faster. Like their rate of development just gets vaulted because they're personally interested in those things. So I think it's just there's no one right or wrong answer. I think it's a very personal choice whether to develop one's career as a generalist. It's very important to know thyself and what the heart wants.
Right. So we have about 3 minutes here. So I think my last question from the chat is about formal degrees and diplomas in UX. And do you think they are important? Can you learn the skills in other ways? And also, in kind of addition to this question, some people are asking like, how do you get experience before you have a job when you're just like learning? So I think this is two questions about learning that would be really great to address.
Yeah. If you look at what hiring managers are looking for at blue chip tech companies that are building out really successful UX teams, they are looking for people with advanced degrees, not just a college degree. They're looking for PhDs in cognitive psychology or anthropology for UX researchers, cognitive science. They're looking for people with degrees in computer science or cognitive science or cognitive engineering, that sort of field for user experience designers. And then people with like at least a bachelor's degree in graphic design, for example, for visual design. And so I know that there are a lot of boot camps out there, like you can take a 3-month boot camp and then build a portfolio. What I have observed is that it is pretty shallow. You kind of learn the language and you come up with a portfolio, but the portfolios coming out of these boot camps tend to be not very deep. And these candidates end up not showing up as strongly as people with degrees from programs that are oriented towards this profession, because they just, 3 months in a boot camp cannot possibly compare to 4 years, for example, developing these skills and practicing this over and over again. And it's not just 1 or 2 classes, but it's the composite of everything that you're exposed to. On the other hand, I have hired many people who have come from adjacent fields, for example, who didn't have degrees in human-computer interaction. In the early days at Yahoo, for example, you can major in this stuff when I was hiring a team. And so I often hired people who maybe came from library science or architecture, for example. These were adjacent fields where they had to employ this kind of thinking for their profession already. And so it was not a huge leap for them to apply that kind of process and thinking towards user experience design. They just had to learn, how to use Photoshop or whatever software it was that was specific for this field as opposed to where they were coming from. So I do think it's possible to make a career transition without a specific formal degree that's oriented towards user experience design, but it is helpful to have some foundation that is relevant, as it will just vault you a little bit faster and higher and get you into these kinds of opportunities that can really help one's career because you have access to mentorship, you have access to community, and those are just as important to the development of a designer as having the degree. Because after you're out of school, how does one really learn? It's through practice and getting feedback and through that mentorship. So look for those things as well.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Irene. We are on time. Thank you for all the questions and for our audience. And Irene, thank you for this conversation. I hope it helps people really find some good balance and the really good roles, and hopefully help for some hiring managers as well who are looking for the top design talent. So thank you so much, and stay tuned. Next week we're gonna share all the recordings, so please stay tuned to that. Thank you. Bye.